Welcome to Being Magnetic, the podcast that taps into the power and magnetism and what it takes you to be that leader speaker that you are called to be. I'm Tina B. I'm an intuitive communication coach, and I'm excited to share with you the context for this particular episode with Frank King. Now, Frank is not only a well-seasoned comedian, he's done so much travel and been on the circuit and written tons of humor and performed it on various stages throughout the United States, as well as performed multiple TED Talks. He's also a seasoned keynote speaker. And I appreciated our conversation on this particular episode because he is really great at laying out true stories and really emphasizes the importance of knowing yourself, being authentic and true, and staying in your lane. And I think that's more important than anything if we think about this idea of magnetism, of how we be, that we know who we are, we show up with integrity, and we stay grounded in that as we communicate on any stage, whether it's the red dot of the TED stage or a signature talk at a conference. If you walk in as a business owner into a networking situation, or you're a high-level leader at a table sharing information to your team, whatever the case may be professionally and even personally in those interpersonal relationships with friends, family, and beyond, it's really crucial to know who you be and what kind of humor you find funny, as well as how you can share in that authentically and true. So stay tuned for this wonderful, insightful, powerful conversation with the one and only Frank King. So tell me, Frank, I would love to hear, when was that first moment of humor or funny that you can remember, maybe as a child?
Fourth grade. I told my first joke. It was an ad lib. I was supposed to be wearing glasses in fourth grade in Mrs. Dark's class. Everybody in my family's terribly nearsighted. And I often joked we're from the island of myopia, where they never saw the enemy coming because they lost over and over because they never saw the enemy coming. It's a joke, actually. So I know I'm supposed to wear my glasses, but this is 65. And there were no fashion frames, and I'm terribly vain. And I had black plastic, sort of Buddy Holly-esque glasses that are very popular today, but back then, and girls had cat eye glasses in a couple of colors. So I didn't want to wear my glasses because I'm vain. But Mrs. Dark knew I should be wearing my glasses. So she thought the reason I wasn't was I was worried about what the other kids would say. They make fun of me, four eyes and so forth. So she decided to pull the Band-Aid off. And probably not a bad idea. But anyway, she got me up at the front of the class. She turned me so my back is now to the class. She put on my glasses on my face, turned me back to the class. And then she looks down at me and she goes, "See, you look intelligent." And I ad-libbed, "Yes, that would explain all the laughter." And the kids laughed. That she was hysterical. She had to excuse herself to go to the teacher's lounge. She was laughing so hard. Years later, I saw her in the Winn-Dixie grocery store, and I said, "Miss Dark, why did you feel like you had to go to the teacher's lounge?" She said, "Frank, I was laughing so hard, I was afraid you'd misinterpret it, and I'd break your heart. What do you do for a living now?" I said, "I'm a stand-up comic." She goes, "Duh."
So perfect. I mean, you kind of started it clear back in the fourth grade. So I'm curious to you, how would you define humor in your own way?
Well, I actually have two mental illnesses, and I can teach you to write stand-up. I can teach you to perform stand-up. I cannot teach you to process incoming information the way my neurodiverse brain does. You often find humor in the anomaly. Comics ask themselves this question constantly: what's wrong with this picture? And I think that's what I have the ability to spot. People walk by or hear, but don't make note of. And the way my brain works is when there's an anomaly, when there's something that doesn't make sense, it catches my ear. And then my brain immediately turns it into something funny. And it's possible. I did a speech for the Vancouver Public Library system up in Vancouver, not British Columbia, Washington. And it was called Finding the Funny. And I said, what you have to do is you have to actively look for it. You put your giggle goggles on, which also comes with an audio feature. So you're looking and listening for something funny, something out of place, something that doesn't make sense, something. And that's where I believe the funny is in life is those moments where I'm at the airport. There are two women talking. One woman says to the other one, "How'd the marriage? How did the wedding go?" And the second woman says, "It came off without a hitch." And I'm thinking, well, if nobody got hitched, what kind of wedding is that? I'm sure other people heard it.
Well, it's all in your connection with the real and the delivery, right? Is that's what I think has made you a funny guy is observing, noticing more, using everything and drawing it in a delivery style that's uniquely yours.
Yes, and I often tell comedy students, stand-up comedy is often more about listening than speaking. You listen and then you go out and report.
Yes.
That's your job, is to observe, listen, see, and then go out and share that with other people. And you need to paint the picture very vividly for them so that you need to take them wherever you were when it happened, so they can appreciate. And the more detailed your description and the sharper the image, the funnier the joke.
Absolutely. And so I would be curious then your perspective on how does humor connect to being magnetic as a communicator? I define magnetism as an attraction, a connection to self and then the other, and that we use our words, our voice, our body, and overall essence to make that impact we desire. So I would love your perspective on humor and being magnetic as a communicator.
Well, for someone to laugh at a joke, you have to connect. If you got an audience of 300 and you're telling a joke, they're not going to laugh unless they're right there with you on the page. If they A, don't believe the premise, or B, you haven't connected with them, there's a good chance they're not going to laugh. There's a reason that slice of life comedy works so well, is because oftentimes people have been through whatever you're describing, a crappy rental car, a bad plane flight, a first marriage. So you have to unite everyone in the room into a single mind for them to laugh at whatever you have to say. And there's a connection. My wife paid me a compliment once. She was at a comedy club in Raleigh watching me work. And after I got done, she goes, "You know what I like? I like to watch the way you seduce the room." She goes, "I can see it going from the first row to the second row to the third row, all the way to the back of the hall as they're connecting with you." There have been moments in my comedy career where I stopped speaking and you could hear a pin drop. They're waiting
Mhm.
for whatever it is you're going to say next. So, and you got them right here. That's the connection you're looking for. And speaking by the same token, I believe a good keynote, good TEDx, moves the audience emotionally. I like to move them from laughter to tears to laughter to tears, because if you can connect emotionally with the audience, you can move them that way. I think that's far more powerful. A sparkling good keynote is not as powerful as a mediocre one that connects with them somehow emotionally. So again, that's that connection. When I tell my stories about my mental illness and the death of my grandmother by suicide, my great aunt by suicide, that I came close enough to killing myself, I can tell you what the barrel of my gun tastes like. They can feel the pain. And then here's why I use the comedy, besides the fact that I'm a comedian, is if you have something serious to tell somebody and you follow it with something funny, then their brain is much more well prepared for the next piece of serious business. They call it comic relief for a reason. And each time it's like breaking, shattering glass when you break, I open up and in my talk, I say that I can tell you what the barrel of my gun tastes like. And then I say to the audience, spoiler alert, I did not pull the trigger.
Right on.
Yeah, and there's like kind of a nervous laugh, like, should we be laughing at this? I even say, it's okay to laugh. That was the point. And then I have another story to follow it up. A friend of mine came up last year after a keynote. He'd never heard me say I didn't pull the trigger. He said, and I quote, "Hey man, how come you didn't pull the trigger?" I said, "Hey man, could you try to sound slightly less disappointed?"
Yeah.
So now they know it's not going to be the average suicide prevention keynote at this point. So it's why people hire me. Somebody asked me, "Do you not get hired to do suicide prevention keynotes because you're a comedian?" No, you got it backwards. They want my lived experience. They want the learning objectives, takeaways, and so forth. And if I can leaven that with organic, well-placed, tasteful, funny anecdotes, not jokes, but anecdotes, that's what gets me over the top.
Absolutely. And what I love is that you pierce the audience's listening so that they choose to listen to you because all communication is persuasive. Your audience can tune you out or choose to listen. So I'm curious, what are some tips that you can provide to help listeners be more magnetic when it comes to being humorous, funny, more comedic element to their communication, not just very formal communication like a keynote, TED Talk, but also in business conversations, interpersonal relationships, etc.
Well, and by the way, there's a new metric. The meeting planner came up to me after an event and she said, Frank, I was watching them watching you. And not one of them was looking at their smartphone. That means that we are connected.
Right.
They don't whatever on the smartphone is not near as important as what I'm about to say, which is a great compliment. So that's as a speaker, as a person in a conversation, you're trying to get them to take their face out of their smartphone. I'm sure we've all been there at Starbucks with somebody and they're constantly glancing down at the screen. You need to get their attention and hold their attention until and I tend to hit the focus button, do not disturb, and then black the screen so that I'm not tempted to to look at it while I'm talking to somebody.
Well, right. Yeah. So, what would be some tips that you would give for us to tap into that so people in the audience don't look at their smartphone or choose distraction over the communication?
Well, I think you need to make that emotional connection, whether it's laughter or tears or both. And I mean, you don't want to do that. You don't want to make people cry at Starbucks. But I think you need to give them your full attention. Multitasking, I think, is a myth. I'm sure a lot of people on Zoom are multitasking, because you can shrink the Zoom down to one side and you can look at your email. So you need to be 100% present to not miss the opportunities to be funny. A turn of a phrase, it just the way somebody said something like, I went to this wedding and it came off without a hitch. I was listening. I'm always listening. I can't, somewhere along the line, the knob on that thing broke off and I can't not hear it. It just comes screaming through. And I usually, respond to it. And about 95% of the time it's golden. 5% of the time it just lands, poo, flat. But, you got to roll the dice. Again, it goes back to listening. If you want to connect with somebody and not just listen to the words they're saying, but the tone, you need context. I was in Vegas at an event. Gentleman said, let's go to lunch. And I said, great, where do you want to go? Now he just heard my suicide prevention talk and my troubles and my struggles with suicide. And he goes, I don't know, pick your poison. And so I didn't say anything. I just looked at him and let him. You go, oh my
Oh.
God. I'm so sorry. So a friend of mine would call that saying it without saying it. All you have to do is pause and let them run it through their mind again. And that happens all the time. Guy called me up. He said, I'm sorry I called you late. I hope I didn't leave you hanging. I said, would you like to rephrase? Oh God.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what you're looking or listening for, is that thing that doesn't belong, that comment that if they thought about it before they'd said it, they would not have said it.
Right.
Yeah. So again, but it goes back to concentrating and listening and giving them 100% of your being. I mean, I want the audience 100% on board, and I need to be 100% on board with them. I don't look anybody in the eye, but I go left, right, left, center, right, left, center, right. I tell my students, when you're on stage, left, center, right. Because if you just do center, right, then you're isolating the people on the left and they'll feel disconnected. So you need to make sure that you're panning back and forth all the way through and all the way to the back wall. Because again, they'll get disconnected. Comedy and speaking is all about connection. And I believe at the heart of that is the emotion. When I tell my speakers, when they ask me about a keynote or TEDx, how do we start? Well, you start with your messes and stresses. The things that you've struggled with, all the crap you've walked through in your life, because it's relatable and it humanizes you. Yeah, don't start off with your successes, messes and stresses, and then once you've painted that picture, then your insights and successes.
Sounds like you're very strategic when it comes to ideas and structuring your talk, like messes and stresses, puts out that vulnerability. And so I'm curious as to what have you found is your creative process? Because you've done a lot of speaking, a lot. I mean, and stand up is very different than a TED Talk. A TED Talk is
Yep.
very different than a keynote. So talk to us a little bit about your creative process as a speaker, a comic, and you've done the creative writing also for a very funny show, The Tonight Show. So I'd love your perspective on that.
Yes, and when I was doing writing for the Tonight Show, I literally would sit down and write jokes. For myself, I never did that. I just stumbled through life, and something would happen, and I was in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I was on my way to the comedy club Charlie Goodnight's, and I passed the Waffle House. You familiar with the Waffle House?
Yes.
Okay. They had a big sign in the window. You could see it from the road. Now accepting applications. So when I got to the comedy club, I opened up. Hey, guy, do you guys know the Waffle House there, right there by the Dorton Arena on Hillsborough Street? Yeah. They got a big sign in the window. Now accepting applications. Do you know what that means? That means at some point in time, the Waffle House actually turns people down. Why would they turn you down for employment at the Casa de los Waffles? Because you have too many teeth? Um, yeah. And I was working with Foxworthy, opening for him in Raleigh at the big Civic Center, 2,500 people. And I passed a billboard, and the billboard was split in half. And there's a cheap fortified wine called Richard's Wild Irish Rose. It's been around forever. But on the billboard, it had Richard's Wild Irish Rose, and it said, "New look, Wild Irish Rose." So the joke I wrote was, and I tried this on Foxworthy backstage. I said, "Do you really think the people who drink this right gut care about aesthetics? Look, Otis, a new screw cap." And the other half of the sign was "New Richard's Wild Irish White Wine." I said to Foxworthy, "What's a white wine for? If you're dumpster diving behind Long John Silver?" So I went out on stage and I opened with it. And I come backstage and he goes, "You open with that." I said, well, you laughed, so I figured it must be funny.
Right.
So it's the longer you do comedy, there's an expression, comedy is tragedy plus time. The longer you do comedy, the shorter the distance between the tragedy and the time you're actually doing comedy in real time. I had a heart attack. And fortunately, I'm in good shape, and I made it back to the car and back to the house, and survived the 25-minute ambulance ride. But I'm in the little triage unit, and the nurse is there. Now, here's people always ask me, is comedy therapeutic for me and my mental illness? Not in the way you would think. As a comedian, I feel I need to make everybody around me comfortable. Comedy is the kind of thing that makes people comfortable, breaks the tension. I can tell the nurse is tense because she's looking at me and I'm having a massive heart attack. I'm in terrible pain. And she says to me, "Frank, look, no paperwork. Obviously, you're having a heart attack, but I do have to ask you one personal question." Through the pain, I said to her, "Oh, honey, I'm married, but I do love the way you think." She's trying not to laugh. She goes, "No, no, your full name is Frank Marshall King III, but what do you like to be called?" Through the pain, I said, "Big Daddy." So to this day, when I go back to Oregon Heart and Vascular and I see somebody, matter of fact, I saw my cardiologist last month. He walks in the door. First thing he says is, "Hey, Big Daddy." So for me, that's what comedy is all about, is making the people around me comfortable. That's why I was never really good at insurance sales, because in insurance sales, you have to show someone where the big hole is in their financial plan and how your product fills it. But to make them see the hole, you make them uncomfortable
Mm.
with that. And it just goes against every fiber of my being to make somebody unhumorous how I make people comfortable.
Right. Well, and it sounds like because you've done so many different speaking contexts, you have different processes. Like stand up requires you to be super, super observant. I mean, all of them do. However, it sounds like you go to the place, you really take it in, take in the setting, and then that inspires the jokes. I mean, you open
Yep.
up with jokes. So that seems very much like what makes the foundation for the humor is being in the setting and saying, okay, I need to relate to these people, make it very relatable what I talk about. So it's about the environment, it's about their way of being and living, and how can I draw that out in a funny way? Whereas maybe for a TED Talk, obviously that's a very different vibe, very different expectation. You apply or get asked to speak, and you have that one idea worth spreading, and you laser focus of blending two very opposite things suicide with humor. And because of that, I mean, you've said to me when we've had conversations, even in my book, Discovering Our Magnetic Speaker Within, you said, know your lane. And that's one thing I've always really appreciated about you as a speaker is that you know those audiences that you speak to and that focus. And so, talk to me if you wouldn't mind sharing, especially in the realm, because TEDx is very, I would say, learned audiences who want to learn, stretch. It could be in universities, but go into the keynote world for a moment because you had to decide. I mean, and I remember you saying to me in some way, shape, or form, it's you can't just say, I'm going to talk to everybody because then you'll talk
Yeah.
to nobody. So share with me that experience.
Well, I started comedy in '85, day after Christmas. You know, probably that my wife and I went on the road for 2,629 nights in a row, nonstop, 7 years and change. And then I did corporate comedy. Um, my purist comic friends hated that. You went corporate. I go, yeah, well, I'm a prostitute, but I'm a high paid prostitute. But all along that timeline, I always wanted to make a living and a difference, and a difference beyond the 45 minutes of endorphins in a comedy show. But I could never figure out how. What was my lane? What was I brought here to talk about? I tell my students, what are you most passionate about? What's the story you can't help but tell? What's the one you tell it raises the hair on your arms? And so I bought a book by Judy Carter called The Message of You: Turn Your Life into a Money-Making Speaking Career. She wrote another book, by the way. If you want to find the funny, she wrote another book called The New Comedy Bible. And it's not a joke writing book. It's a book about taking your personal experiences and making them funny. She has a formula for doing that. So you're not joke writing, you're taking your actual, what happened to you and make that funny. So it's original to you. It's a signature story for you. But I read the book, went into it thinking I got nothing to talk about. No, what I had to teach anybody. Halfway through, I thought, oh dear God, I do have something to talk about. Well, because I have two mental illnesses, came very close to suicide. There are more nuts in my family than in a squirrel turd. And I thought, if I got some training, I could keynote on suicide prevention. And I got the training. And then it occurred to me, okay, wait a minute. I've been doing stand-up for 2.5 decades. Who's going to take me serious on anything? My wife said, do a TEDx. I said, what's a TEDx? It wasn't on my bucket list, wasn't on my radar. But I got an application that week from a TEDx in Canada, and I filled it out, got the audition, got the gig. It's all about starting the conversation on suicide. And two more events called me after that and said, do you have any more mental health topics? Yes. So that was my lane, suicide prevention. Because what I discovered was, even though one person dies by suicide every 9 minutes in the US, every 40 seconds worldwide, hardly anybody talks about it unless you bring it up. And then almost everybody has a story. And that's what I get paid for, is bringing up. Go on stage, especially as a man, being vulnerable, which I believe, as Brene Brown does, is a superpower, especially for a speaker, and give people permission to give voice to their feelings and experiences around depression and thoughts of suicide. So I found my lane. Now, the way I create TEDx talks is, the first one was organic. It was my origin story. It was all about, I didn't tell anybody I had two mental illnesses until I was 52 years old. I came out on that stage at TEDx in front of God and everybody, as we say down south, as depressed and suicidal. I have something called chronic suicidal ideation, which means for me and people like me in my tribe, the option of suicide is always on the menu as a solution for problems large and small. And when I say small, my car broke down a couple of years ago. I had three thoughts: one, get it fixed; two, buy a new; and three, I could just kill myself. That's chronic suicidal ideation. So after the first one, I began to look about for ideas on mental health, mental illness, suicide prevention, whatever. And my process is, I lie in bed in the morning after I get up, alarm goes off, get up, do a shot of espresso, lie back down. And I lie there sometimes for an hour just thinking. And a nugget, an idea would come to me. The third TED talk was Mental with Benefits: The Evolutionary Advantages of Mental Illness. And the genesis of that was, a lot of people I know who have a mental health challenge also have some sort of corresponding superpower. And I thought to myself, this cannot be a coincidence. So then I did the research. And sure enough, there are benefits to each and every mental ailment, as long as you're not completely dysfunctional. Dyslexic have better peripheral vision, and they have the uncanny ability to spot the anomaly in anything. The joke I wrote was, never play Where's Waldo with a dyslexic for money you're going to lose. And it starts with a question. What if those of us with a mental illness are not living with a genetic mutation, but an amazing evolutionary adaptation? That was the nugget that sprang to life into a full-blown TEDx talk. And then I went back to my origin story, thinking about how I got into comedy. And when it occurred to me one morning in the dark, suicide was actually the secret of my success. TED starts like this. What would you do if you knew for a fact you had absolutely nothing to lose? What audacious goal would you pursue if you knew for a fact that by not pursuing it, you would literally die? That's where I was in January of 1984. Married, miserable. Selling insurance, miserable. Not doing what I thought I should be doing, going to the comedy store and doing open mics to start my comedy career, and miserable. And that's the first time the thought of suicide crossed my mind. Why don't you just kill yourself? My second thought, very empowering. Wait a minute. I could divorce my wife, quit my job, try comedy. If it works, great. If it doesn't, hell, I can still kill myself. That's the premise of that fourth TEDx talk. Again, it came to me. That's my creative time, is lying there in the dark and just letting my brain. I think if you want to be creative, I think you need to do nothing. Take the earbuds out, lie down in the dark, no distractions, phone on, do not disturb, and just let your mind go. And over time, I've trained my mind that that's the time of day that I'm looking for ideas. A friend of mine, I was looking for a tagline for him. Anthony Metton, he does soft skills, individuation, communication, emotional intelligence. He goes, Frank, I need a tagline. I go, I'm getting ready to go to bed. I'll let you know in the morning. So I go to bed. I woke up at 2 a.m. I lie there in dark. I'm laying there in dark. No, I'm lying there in the dark. My mother was an English teacher. Lying there in the dark. And it hit me. I knew exactly what it should be. So I texted him, Anthony Metton, soft skills, concrete results. Text came screaming back. Number one, Frank, you woke me up, you bastard. And number two, did you think of that in your sleep? Yeah, as a matter of fact, I did. So that's my creative process. I think we've lost the ability to do nothing, and also I've got a speaker who talks about daydreaming, how people have been daydreaming less and less over time. Because, if you're daydreaming, you can't be doing something else. You need to get lost in your mind. And I've been doing that. I think it's something to do with my mental illness, because I was describing a daydream to a friend of mine. Because in my daydream, A, I'm always the hero of the daydream. B, I've got camera angles, lighting, dialogue, and I describe in color. I describe it to him, and he looks at me and goes, man, I need to get better daydreams. But that's, again, that creative process. So again, I think people need to pull out the earbuds, go to a quiet place, lie down, nothing else going on, close your eyes, 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and just see what occurs to you.
Yeah, you hit a lot of things there, Frank, that I think are super valuable. The first being that you took time. You took time. I mean, you've done multiple TED Talks and things were slowly revealed to you. So giving yourself some of that spaciousness. And I also love this idea of, going back to that origin story of, awareness. And it was like, oh, baby steps into what does this mean? And that's where it starts to reveal. And then a big thing is the irony of slow productivity, as Cal Newport calls it, where I love his books. And he talks about deep work and the importance of just resting and not pushing and being distracted. And so I love that you have a process for that that's simplistic. And yet somehow in our minds, we tell ourselves we need to be doing. And I think that's where the creativity it's like stuck. You need time to incubate. Incubation takes time. And I love that you have a way of doing that you don't force. The force field will not create beautiful, yummy jokes. So I would love for people to get in touch with you. What are some ways that they can do that if they're curious to know more, if they're looking for a keynote speaker or TEDx coaching? How can they get in touch with you?
Well, big on LinkedIn. Mental health comedian is my handle on LinkedIn. And that's, I realized, speaking of, going to one lane, going deep, not wide, I realized I was doing a really bad job on 5 social media platforms. So it occurred to me, well, why not go deep on one? So people listening, I just figured out where my clients, my potential clients were. And I realized they're on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
I mean, I still have a Facebook page and I advertise on Instagram, but so they find me on LinkedIn. If they want to speak, how to make money speaking.com. Now, the funny thing about that, how to make money speaking.com, I was trying to come up with a URL, a domain name. My wife knew this. She doesn't know much about the web. Thank God, because she doesn't know what she doesn't know. So she goes, why not just go with how to make money speaking.com? And I'm sitting there, she couldn't see the eye roll. I'm thinking, oh yeah, in 2024, how to make money speaking.com is still going to be available. So I to honor her idea, I went on GoDaddy. Oh my God, it's available. So, yeah, but see, if she'd known better, she never would have said that, but she didn't know. Yeah. So that's, so how to make money speaking.com is, you can find me there.
That's a fabulously easy website to remember. I love it. So I would love for you to share one last parting insight about humor, about being magnetic that you want people, the listeners, to kind of resonate with.
Well, humor, and this worries me. First comedian was a court jester. Court jester's job was to speak truth to power on behalf of the powerless with humor. And through the centuries, that's been the comedian's job. Speak truth to power on behalf of the powerless with humor. Say the things out loud that other people will not say, but they are thinking. That's really the comic's job. And it's been slowly but surely shut down in the comedy clubs over the last couple of years because people get offended. I mean, they take issue with the comic during the show on stage. And back in my time, back in the day, if you didn't like the show, you went back to the box office, got your money back and left. But they feel somehow empowered to stand up and say something or throw something and I think comedians are the canaries in the coal mine. We're screaming about whatever it is long before anybody else. For example, the priests and altar boy, the Catholic sexual scandal. Comics were talking about that in the 1950s. They were joking about that. It didn't break until the mid 90s. Comics knew about Harvey Weinstein and were joking about him in public at events, awards things 10 years before, the Me Too movement finally brought him down. So if you want to know what you really want to know what's going on, listen to the comedians because we make it palatable. We make it okay to say it out loud because it's funny.
Right. You make the hard to listen to because you bring in this thing we call humor and funny and delight in laughter because who doesn't love to laugh? I don't know of anybody.
It was said once that advertising is the truth told well,
Mm,
and comedy is the truth told funny.
yes. That's a perfect last line, Frank. I cannot thank you enough and thank our listeners to the Be Magnetic podcast and for tuning into today's episode. And if you want to know more and get more tips and tools, you can tune in. And Frank is in this. I interviewed him. My book.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Discovering Our Magnetic Speaker Within. And he gives some great insights on this idea of humor and magnetism and vulnerability with his stories and examples. And also, I want to thank you again, Frank, for taking the time today to sharing your stories, sharing examples and strategies and insights. And for those of you listening, if you found value in today's episode, I ask that you share it with others because we all want a good laugh. And till next time, be you and be true.